All right. Welcome to Political Head Trauma, where if Head Trauma had a podcast, it'd sound just like this. Hope everybody is having a good Wednesday night. We have our Congresswoman, Celeste Maloy, on, and we've asked her to come on to chat about some of the recent votes that everybody seems to be up in arms about.
And I'm seeing, and welcome everybody. It is a special edition Wednesday evening. And once again, I reach out to our Congresswoman and her staff, and within hours, not even hours, within 20 minutes, we have a confirmation for her to be on the show tonight. So thank you and welcome, Celeste, for starters.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. I'm getting to be a frequent flyer. I'm like that late night radio person who calls in every night.
I love it. Well, and you probably haven't had even a second, but I'm sure your staff has been kind of keeping up with what's been said on, from other campaigns. And the one thing that I hate, and I know a lot of people like me here in the county dislike, is a muddy campaign. You have been above board with this campaign. There's been a lot of accusations, and a lot of them are centered around your vote.
Yeah.
And they're centered around your predecessor, which neither here nor there. I want you on here as my Congresswoman to explain these votes and keep it above board like you have been. I certainly don't like it.
I'm happy to have a forum to talk about those votes. I've been calling as many delegates as I can while I have to also do my day job. And you're right, this is what everybody wants to talk about. And so it's nice to have this opportunity to talk to everybody at once. And because I've made hundreds of phone calls, I kind of already know what the questions are. So if it's all right with you, I'm just gonna launch into it.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Okay. So the two votes everybody wants to talk about are the spending bill and FISA. So let's do them in that order. So spending bill, I released a video and I still had a lot of people asking me, yeah, but why? You said there were some good conservative wins in that vote, but it was still a lot of money and I don't like spending money. So let me take a step further back than where I started my video and talk about, we were at a spending deadline, at a funding deadline. The government was about to run out of money. So I'd already voted against 2 continuing resolutions because I just don't like continuing resolutions, especially at this point in this Congress. We were still funding the government at the same levels and with the same funding priorities as when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House. We needed to have our own spending bill, our own funding priorities. So,
and Celeste, that was also like COVID era spending.
Yeah. So when we're running out of funding, we've got 3 options as a Congress. We can pass a CR, we can pass a spending bill, or we can go into a shutdown. Those are the options we have. And I've talked to a lot of people who say, yeah, but why not go into a shutdown? The government's spending too much money. And if we shut it down, then they can't spend money. And the truth is, you can turn a shutdown into a win. We're not very good at it as Republicans. We get blamed for shutdowns and people get angry. But if we would stand pat as a conference and everybody stand shoulder to shoulder and say, we will not open the government back up until we get X, Y, and Z, then we can turn a shutdown into a win. This conference won't even stand pat and stand shoulder to shoulder on a rule vote to bring a bill to the floor. We fight each other on process, and standing together during a shutdown requires, what can I say on the air? Requires guts. It takes people who are willing to take a political beating, and we just haven't been willing to do that. But even if we did, when we shut the government down, this is the part that people don't always think through. Every government shutdown, we've come back. We've always opened the government back up. And people always say to me, well, nobody really gets hurt in a shutdown because we pay them back pay. And that's kind of the point. If we shut down the government, we reopen every time with a big omnibus spending bill. That's how we end government shutdowns. So going into a shutdown isn't the cost-saving solution that people think it is. I'm not scared of doing a shutdown if we can create a political climate where we can turn that into a win, but we're not in that political climate right now. So my options were vote for a continuing resolution that continues Nancy Pelosi's COVID era, liberal priority spending, go into a shutdown where we would get bruised and bloodied and everybody would panic and then would pass a big omnibus, or vote for a spending bill that did have actual cuts in it. I know they're not as big as people wanted, but they're cuts, and has really important conservative policy wins in it. And there are a lot of things to dislike about that bill. To be honest, I wasn't super excited that we were voting on that bill. But of the three options in front of me, it was clearly the most conservative, most fiscally conservative, the only one where we're not spending more money. So I voted yes on the spending bill. And I knew when I voted people wouldn't be happy. So I immediately went out and started talking to people. 24 hours later, I was on a stage in St. George explaining that vote. And I made the video, and I think I came and talked to you guys. I went on every radio station that would let me on, because when I take votes that people aren't going to like, I try to make sure they at least know why I did it. And if they disagree, that's fair, but I want them to know what was at stake and how I arrived at my decision.
For me, Celeste, I think a lot of Americans are sick and tired of paying for Ukraine and all this money going to Ukraine. And you did say that when you were in your debate with Bruce Huff, you were done with Ukraine as well until it gets an audit. Has the public, what do you know that we don't know that would entice you to vote for another spending bill to Ukraine? Has there been an audit done?
So yes, there has been more reporting from Ukraine on how they spent the money, but also I voted against the Ukraine bill. So this last Saturday, we voted on foreign aid, and I voted for foreign aid to Israel. I voted for foreign aid to, Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. I voted for the border bill that was part of it, but I voted against Ukraine. And I've taken some heat for that since then. I've had a lot of people calling me and saying, what are you thinking? Ukraine's important. And to be clear, I do think we need to support Ukraine. But I feel okay supporting them with lethal aid, sending them bullets and weapons, but I don't want to send them cash. And that bill was a lot of cash.
You've said that time and time again, that there was no accountability with cash.
Yep.
Was that bill separated?
Yeah. So in the House, we voted on 4 separate bills, but then they got combined into one bill to go over to the Senate, because the Senate wouldn't vote on 4 separate bills.
See,
can you make us go live Facebook? Because a lot of people don't.
No, I cannot. I can't. They changed something and it wouldn't bump live. There's nothing I can do.
Okay.
So everyone, if you want to comment, you have to go to YouTube and comment, or you know what, go ahead and send me a Facebook message. I'll make sure before we cut her loose.
Yeah, you
at
can leave
5:30. We only have her till 5:30. So if you want to ask her a question, pop it in now.
Leave your comments on the post.
How do I put this gently? I think demographically, Ukraine is a lost cause. It's a losing fight. I don't think it's winnable. I'm not in the current status where we're having Ukraine fight it. All we're doing is wiping out a generation of young men in Ukraine. That's just my opinion. Of course, everyone knows I'm a IQ 15 moron, but
Ukraine decided to fight this fight. I mean, we didn't tell them to defend themselves against Russia.
They did. I'm wondering if Ukraine still feels that way today.
Yeah, to be fair, I have not been to Ukraine. A bunch of my colleagues were recently there, and they say that Ukraine does. But this is, now I'm speaking from the top of Mount Stupid, because I wasn't actually there. But when a foreign adversary invades one of their neighbors, I do think it's important that we give them whatever support is appropriate. And I don't think cash is the right answer on this one, but I do think giving them lethal aid is the right support for us to give Ukraine. And I can't see the clock right now. I don't know how we are on time. Do you want to talk about FISA?
I do want to talk about FISA, because you're getting so much flack for giving away Americans. Now, I know you said, and we posted your video here, and you said that actually you've caused your votes and the reform that you created was that now the FBI will actually be in trouble. There will actually be punishment and penalty. My question is, and what people are saying, well, that's great and good, but you got to catch them first.
Yep.
And what are we doing to try to catch them? And why are we just not ending FISA altogether? Because we think,
Yeah.
I mean, we all know it's a violation of our Fourth Amendment.
Okay, so that's a good segue, because I think I usually start too far in on FISA and talking about the reforms. So let's take a step back and talk about FISA itself. So FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, authorizes our intel agencies to surveil foreigners outside the United States. Foreigners outside the United States don't have Fourth Amendment rights. And so you already have to have a warrant to surveil a U.S. citizen. I mean, that is the Fourth Amendment. We don't have to pass a bill for that. It exists. But foreigners outside the United States do not have Fourth Amendment rights. What's been happening, though, is that when these intel agencies have been surveilling foreigners outside the United States, they get incidental information on Americans. So
Right.
if they're surveilling, somebody in Taiwan who has connections with the Chinese Communist Party, that person may also be communicating with U.S. citizens. And they're getting, if they get the phone, they get all that information. And that information is sitting in a database. That's what the 702 database is. It's the things that have been incidentally collected. And there's a lot of information in there. Congress can't actually get a straight answer on how much information is in that database. But some of the things we know are like when these abuses were running rampant and there wasn't any oversight, people were doing things like running their Tinder dates through that database to see what they'd find. You don't run your Tinder date through a database you think only has information on foreign terrorists. I mean, unless I've never used Tinder, but
Well,
if you've got your settings, so that you're only finding people from the Middle East who hate Israelis, then maybe
Yeah.
there's a reason to run them
what
through
was
there.
that
But
congressman from California, Swalwell?
Eric Swalwell.
He
Yeah.
should have done that.
No, but
Yeah, in
Celeste,
his case, that might have made sense. So a lot of the questions I get about FISA are not actually FISA related. So a lot of people who talk to me about FISA are mad about something that the FBI is doing that isn't something they're doing because of FISA.
let's talk about just what they did to Trump.
Yeah.
Because that directly involved FISA.
Yes, it did. Okay, so Carter Page, they were gathering information on Carter Page and using this FISA database for it. So in the 56 reforms that are in there, some of them are that you can't use a news article or opposition research as grounds to get a warrant. So if someone writes a news article and says you're a terrorist, they've got to be able to find some evidence to corroborate that to be able to go run you through this database. And don't forget, in the Carter Page case, they did have a warrant. They just lied to get it.
Yes.
And so that's why, for me, the punishments were so important, because if you have rules, but the FBI can break them, then you don't really have rules.
Right.
So you can't use opposition research or news to get a warrant. You also can't run anybody through that database to get evidence of a crime. You can only use that database when it relates to surveillance of foreigners outside the United States. And 90% of the people who used to have access to that database don't under these reforms. So only 10% of them still have access. And then when they're querying the database, there's a 100% audit of those queries. So you've got to say who you're querying, why you're querying them, and there's an electronic trail. And it's got to be linked to surveilling a foreigner outside of the United States. 100% audit by an outside entity, and then that audit gets reported to Congress. So that's 2 layers of oversight outside the Department of Justice. And then, as you mentioned, sorry, go ahead.
What's the outside entity?
I don't know yet, but that's what's required in the law.
With this all new thing too, I mean, you say there's a lot that you really don't know about what's contained in that database. Why is that? You're Congress. Why is the FBI overstepping the duly elected representatives to hide? I mean, this is
Remember, their building
infuriating.
is the J. Edna Hoover building, so that says it all.
But what can you do to change that? Will this change that?
That's what these reforms are for, to change that. So an outside entity has to do an audit, then they've got to report to Congress. And it's not just to Congress, they've got to report to the Judiciary Committee. So the people who are on that committee are people who are very interested in holding the FBI accountable. And it's kind of the nature of that committee that it'll always be made up of people who are interested in holding the FBI accountable. In the video I sent you, I was talking to Kelly Armstrong from North Dakota. He used to be a defense attorney. He's very skeptical of somebody who has the authority to spy on Americans. That's something he's always going, or somebody like him, he's leaving Congress, but somebody like him will always be really skeptical, and they have oversight authority. So FISA is an important tool. It's an important tool we use to spy on foreigners. We know that there are people in the world right now who do not have our best interests at heart. We know that Russia and China and Iran are all planning things, and we've got to have the ability to watch what they're doing, but we can't let that important tool be weaponized against Americans. And that's what the FISA reforms are about, making sure that this tool is used the way it's intended to be used and not abused to spy on Americans. And I felt like the reforms we got in there address those concerns and make it so we can't have another Crossfire hurricane, and we can't have a Carter Page situation. And if somebody tries, they're going to jail. They get jail time for that now. And I just have to believe that if you're an FBI agent who's, getting overly zealous and wants to go after somebody like Carter Page, you're sitting there at your keyboard trying to decide whether to type in this query. In the back of your mind thinking, do I want to spend a decade in prison over this? You make a different calculation than before, where it's like, I'm the FBI, nobody knows what I'm doing, and nobody's going to come after me.
So this gets me to another point. Yes, it does good things when it's spying on foreigners, but this brings me back to the border. Yeah. A lot of these foreigners are coming over the border now, and a lot are unaccounted for. And if they're able to track people, say in Iran, who've now crossed the border, are they still able to track them now that they're on United States territory?
Nope.
How did you vote for protecting the border?
So I voted for the border bill on Saturday.
People are saying you didn't.
Yeah, no, I did. There's a lot of bad information out there about my votes, and my social media says how I voted on all of these, so you can go check that out. And also, it's pretty easy to check. It's a matter of public record. But I did vote for the border bill, and it would have passed if we had passed the rule related to it. But our own Republicans fought us on the rule and made it so that the rule didn't pass. So we had to vote on suspension. And on a suspension vote, you have to have a 2/3 majority for it to pass. So we had a majority, but it didn't reach 2/3.
What was the rule, Celeste?
The rule was just that's the ground rules for how a bill comes to the floor to be voted on. So I always vote on a rule and then vote on the bill. So we talk all the time about the 72-hour rule, and that means the time between the rule and when we vote on the bill. So it's just a procedural thing.
Any Utah Republicans that didn't have your back on this vote?
No. Well, which thing do you mean, on the rule?
On just this spending and not spending on Ukraine, the border bill, border bill. Why is every single person in Congress not voting to protect this border?
I think, well, I don't know. I shouldn't speak for other people. I think they felt like it was a gesture, kind of a symbolic vote. And to some extent it was, because it was a lot of the elements of HR 2, and we've already passed HR 2. And the truth is, we could pass a border, well, we clearly can't pass a border bill, but even if we passed a border bill and it was a wonderful border bill, it doesn't matter when we have a president who will not enforce it. He already has tools. It's not a funding issue. Throwing more money at the border won't fix it.
And it's already a lot.
I've been saying that forever. We don't need a new bill to cover what was done the administration before him. The administration before that, the Democrat administration before the previous one, managed this. I've got a hard question now.
Okay.
A hard comment, and I want your thoughts on it.
All right.
For a long time, I felt like we are a weapons dealing military industrial complex and an intelligence agency with a nation attached. Am I wrong?
I think you are wrong, and here's why. Because we also have a constitution. So there are countries out there that start weapons dealing and they're influence peddling in the world, and what they're trying to do is grow their own power and their ability to control the rest of the world. We are still the shining city on a hill that Reagan talked about. We're the world superpower, and that means we have to do some things to keep peace in the world and to support stability in geopolitics. But what we don't do is go influence peddle to try to take over other countries. And that's why I think it's not fair to call us a military industrial complex with a nation attached. I think there are nations in the world that very much fit that description, but they aren't bound by constitutional limits. And that's why, you know, every time I'm on your show, we talk about crazy stuff sometimes, but we always talk about the really boring stuff. We talk about separation of powers and limited government and federalism. And that's why those things are so important. Whatever the sexy issue is of the day that everybody's hair is on fire about, the answer is those fundamental things. The answer is, what's the role of the government here? What limitations does the Constitution have? What are the voters willing to put up with? Ultimately, we the people run this government. And when we lose sight of that, we make crazy decisions. You know, in the law, we always say bad facts make bad law. And it's true in politics too. Bad facts make bad politics. Bad reactions make bad policy. And so we always have to keep going back to the high school government answers. Like, is this something that's even constitutional? Is this something our nation should be doing? Did it go through the right channel? Did we go through proper order in Congress? Is this something the states could do better? Is this something that belongs to the executive branch, or is it something that should be done in the legislative branch? That's what makes it so that we're not just a military industrial complex with a nation attached.
Well, I agree with you. Here's what I picture.
Okay.
Is we're sending money to Ukraine and Israel so they can turn around and buy weapons that we manufacture
And build
Yep.
more walls.
therefore putting money into our undoubtedly wealthiest 1%, which then floods the market, which then drives up our inflation, which is pinching all of the lesser folk right now. And that's just my picture. And I may be wrong
Yeah.
because, again, IQ 43 moron, but that's what it feels.
I agree with you when we're sending out checks to everybody. What we're doing is just flooding the market and creating inflation. When we're buying actual goods, which is what's happening when we're sending weapons to countries, then you are supporting an economy. It's an economy that, you know, we don't always talk about, which is weapons and military technology. But a lot of that is
destruction is by its very nature an inflation economy.
Yeah, but
Okay.
what bothers me is
Because it's not an economy that circulates. It's an economy that goes pop and then it's done.
and sometimes we choose the wrong people. Sometimes in the history of our United States,
Well,
we have chosen the wrong people to lead, and we always end up having to build back better the places that we get involved with where our military has destroyed. And I think that all of that on the back of we're taking out loans to do this for other people. And right now, Ukraine is funding the wall they're building on the Russia border.
And
Israel's
actually-
putting up walls. And, you know, in retrospect, for Americans, that's aggravating because you're loaning
Yep.
this money and we don't even have it to do that. And then when I see a CIA or FBI who's going around our actual Congress and Senate, I really, really am aggravated. I appreciate the reforms that you put in there because I think at the end of the day, and I hope you got a lot of people on your side for this, because the American people are done. I mean, if you were to walk into Congress tomorrow and get the majority on board to absolutely obliterate the CIA, I think the American people would applaud you and be happy. Most of us don't know what they do, but we do know they have a lot of influence in other countries that could probably save us some money just to get out. So the reform, there has to be some fear there when they're spending our money, when they're taking our liberties, and our Congress has let them for years and years and years.
And there has to be accountability and transparency. Anytime there are taxpayer dollars involved, there has to be accountability and transparency. We have a right to know how our taxpayer dollars are being spent. We need to spend fewer dollars. We all agree on that. But whatever dollars we're spending, we need to be able to account for them and know where they're going. And I do think you're right, Holly. People are just fed up. Inflation's still high, and the world's a dangerous place, and we're not living as well as we should be living on our paychecks. And there's just an undertone right now of we've had it. It's time to fix a lot of the things that we've slowly let break little by little over the last few decades. And, Jared, to your point, nobody wants to be in another forever war. And I think there's an important distinction to be made here of the places we just talked about. We're not sending troops, we're sending lethal aid. And that is an important distinction, that we're not sending our sons and daughters to die on foreign soil in these conflicts. But if we let them spin out of control, we're going to end up in a hot war. Then we're sending our own kids into these wars. And so there is a strategic advantage to having, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? But we've got to be really smart about it. We've got to be deliberate about it, and we've got to be transparent about it. What role we play in the world has to be something we've decided and not something we just sort of accidentally stumble around doing.
Where was that ounce of prevention when Victoria Nuland was over there in 2012 through 14? It seems like goading Vlad into doing exactly what he's done. That's what it feels like. A moron from the outside reading this.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's been a while since I was in high school, but there were a few times in high school I goaded morons into doing things they wanted to do anyway, and it usually ended up in an epic story, but not a wise decision by any of us.
And I agree. Let's look at this. I don't put the full blame on the United States because Russia's in a time bomb that it's in the early stages of full collapse, which this is what countries in full collapse do. It's acting exactly as history says it should.
It looks like winning this war.
Well, yes, but I feel like Victoria Nuland over there, I mean, I don't know. I would, at this point in time, I'd have to see evidence that the CIA wasn't involved with the color revolution over there. To prove, and I'm sorry, CIA. I know you guys are all patriots, but you have a track record.
So I don't get paid to promote books or anything, but have you read The Accidental Superpower by Peter Zeihan?
No.
Yes, I have, and I understand his argument, and I completely agree. We've withdrawn from being the secure of a capitalist economy.
Yeah,
but we've also withdrawn from that because we overreached in that time. After World War II, had we treated it like, say, we did prior to Korea, I think we could have secured that position forever. But then we start Vietnam.
Her talk.
We
don't have
no, you're fine. And I do have to leave in a couple minutes. I just want to point out that he says in that book, I mean, I think it was written in like 2014. I think it's a 10-year-old book, but he predicts that Russia's going to make a move in the 2020s because they're a civilization that's about to go into decline, and that is what civilizations that are in decline do. They get aggressive with their neighbors. So I was going to give you credit, Jared, for calling that one. That's awesome. You may be a low IQ Sasquatch, but you're making the same arguments as brainiacs.
Here's the thing that him and I discuss all the time is that it's easy to talk about how a person's going to vote on the Hill and how they're going to do this. And even, when you were in debates, I mean, you had all these dreams and visions, and then you get there.
Yeah.
Then you learn what you didn't know.
What is it like when they show you the rest of the Zapruder film?
My question is, it's got to be pretty stressful when your own party comes in and expects you to vote a certain way. I mean, you've probably got a lot more in front of you than you can ever tell us or that you can even share. But tell us how you're adapting and what you think.
So I will tell you this. I have never had the party try to pressure me to vote a certain way. So I've been there for 4 months, and it's been a brutal 4 months for everybody. Everybody's tired. We're in such a closely divided Congress. I guess it's technically not the slimmest majority in the history of the Congress, because there was a little while in World War I where Congress was just smaller and they had a 1-vote majority. So technically their ratios are a little tighter, but it's tough. And what happens is you end up having to bring bills to the floor that nobody really likes. And you get to vote yes or no. I mean, it would be great if everyone in Congress had a pocket veto and we could be like, yes, I like this line, but I don't like that line. But what happens is you get down there, you've got your card, and you have to vote yes or no. And you have to make a decision, and then you spend weeks explaining that decision, and there's always something to criticize. Criticism is cheap, and we can all afford to have, a house full of it. And I recognize that. And so that's one of the reasons that I try to be so proactive about going out and talking about these votes, is that we're taking kind of hellish votes right now.
Right.
And the American people are along for this ride.
The bills are this thick, and you get one option to say yes or no on. I don't think people realize that you're not getting these little tiny one-page bills where we can actually see exactly what you think about all these topics. It's getting thrown into huge bills.
And nobody wants to hear me complain, so I'm not going to do that. But I do just want to make sure people understand how this really works. The negotiation happens, and when you've got a big majority, then you get a lot of wins in those negotiations when you have a really closely divided Congress. And as conservatives, we like to fight with each other. It's always going to be that way. We do not get in lockstep like the Democrats do. It's just in our nature. We like rogues, we like mavericks, we like people who don't get in line, which means we're going to be walking the plank and taking hellish votes anytime we're in the majority and have a really slim majority. But in a way, it's kind of beautiful. This is America, and we have the freedom to disagree, and we have the freedom to punch our own team in the face whenever we want. And we're not in a country where the party tells you that you have to do certain things. I have the freedom to make these choices and come back and talk to my constituents about them, and nobody's going to behead me for it. They might yell at me, they might throw me out of office, but don't despair yet, I guess is what I'm saying. My biggest fear is that the hyperbole will get to all of us and we'll just decide to burn the whole thing down. There's nothing better out there. There is not a better system than the one we've got. So we've got to get in, we've got to do the work, we've got to fix the problems with our system, because if we throw this one away, everything else has been tried. In the history of the world, we've tried it all. It's all failed. There's not a system that's better at protecting freedoms. We can get better at how we work our system, but there's not a system that's better at protecting freedoms. So let's take our freedom seriously. Let's get in and do the work to fix our own system. Because I think sometimes we get so frustrated that we talk in such extreme terms that we're telegraphing out there that we're ready to burn the whole thing down. And that would be a tragedy. And also, I was supposed to leave 2 minutes ago, so now I'm late. I'm going to make that my closing remarks.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Transparency, you've kept your promise to that.
Oh, excellent. And I love that we're able to reach out to you, and I hope we keep that going, because one of us will hound you again
I will see you on Saturday.
Weeks. Great. I'm happy to keep talking to people. That is one of the best parts of this job.
We need you to come back up here to Tooele next time you're in Utah and
She's going to be at convention Saturday.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to see you come up and do more than that. Reach out and have like an open for everyone to come and yell at you or shake your hand.
Happy to. I'm getting really good at standing in the front of a room and letting people yell at me. So we'll do it.
I'll bet you
plan a party.